The Anton Savage Show on Today FM with Toyota.
And it's summer showtime next week at your Toyota dealer with amazing 152 offers available. Toyota, the best built cars in the world.
So I mentioned earlier on that there is a new show coming to Sky One this evening. It is on at 8 o'clock. It is called Fright Club, and it looks at people who have phobias. And one of the people who is involved in it is the person responsible for the privatetherapyclinic.co.uk. And the Private Therapy Clinic is a clinic on Harley Street, which is about as fancy as it gets, and that is where Dr. Becky Spelman is the resident psychotherapist and psychiatrist, and a woman who originally hails from Nina in Tip. Becky, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing, Anton?
Very good. Sorry for rechristening you Becker.
Yeah, or Docky, or you can call me whatever. It's fine.
Appreciate that. You're very good about that. We've had a huge amount of queries that are coming in relation to phobias for you. I'll ask you wider stuff about the show as we go. But first of all, we had this one that goes, "Hi Anton, I'd really appreciate if you could ask the doctor about this. I have a fear of eating around other people. I got sick about 7 years ago and had stomach problems. I now associate eating around other people with that time when I wasn't able to eat. The fear of going back to that time where I couldn't eat has literally crippled my life since then. Even when I'm happy, successful, otherwise fulfilled, I get a paralysing fear in my stomach at the possibility of eating out with people. Knee-jerk reaction. I've gone to counselling, I've tried rationalising it away, but nothing works. I think at this point I have a fear of the fear itself. I'll do anything to avoid it, which I know is no good because I can't even have a relationship or live my life. Can you please help at all?"
Poor guy. I mean, gosh, that's pretty debilitating. Although he's had that for quite a long time, and it sounds pretty serious, it sounds like a real vicious cycle for him, and he's possibly afraid of vomiting, the possibility that he might vomit, and how embarrassing that would be, and overestimating the possibility of that happening. The way to overcome that, it's a really simple method, but it's not simple for him to do. It's really difficult. He will have to start small, and he'll have to start putting himself in those uncomfortable situations. Maybe start with a place that's not too busy, where there's not so many people around, maybe just eating very small amounts and then building it up. So it's a little bit like a hierarchy. And he will desensitize. He will realise that actually his worst fear is not going to come true in those situations.
And when you're planning a response like that, how do you decide which of the various different therapies work? Because there's a wide spectrum of stuff. There's that sort of gradual walking somebody up to it. There's CBT. There's this eye flicker stuff.
Yeah, I do it all. There's lots of different techniques that are evidence-based, and from practice you learn what works best and what works fastest. I do use a lot of different techniques, but for phobias I always like to start with exposure therapy, because usually it works, and usually it works as fast as anything else. Take them out of the clinic, bring them into the real world, get them exposing themselves to the situation. It's a bit like watching a horror movie 100 times. First time you're going to have that reaction, but if you do it again and again, it just neutralizes everything. So for all of this kind of stuff, even that phobia of eating in public, it would be exposure therapy.
And is that the case depending on, are there some things where the phobia is such that it's very difficult to achieve that? Like let's say it's a fear of flying.
Yeah.
It's hard to incrementally expose somebody to flying, or is it?
Yeah, it is hard. And I have a friend I'm helping with a fear of flying at the moment. He has to drink a lot of alcohol to get through the flight, which isn't good. For those situations, I use a technique called eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is the eye flicking thing, as you mentioned, and it helps deal with the anxiety before someone even goes into the situation. There's a lot of very simple breathing techniques that I teach people as well. They're simple, but they're not simple to remember when the person's in the situation. So we do a lot of practice before they actually go in. So there is ways of helping people manage their anxiety before they even go into the situation in the first place, because for some people they're not quite ready for the exposure therapy.
Can you just describe briefly the way the eye movement desensitizing works? Because it's the oddest sounding procedure.
Yeah, it's a bit crazy sounding, and it's a bit like, how could this possibly work? But believe it or not, it works. You have your hand in front of the client's eyes and you're literally waving it from left to right, and it stimulates the left and right hemisphere of the brain, and it's sort of like your emotional side of your brain and your logical side of your brain come together and have a bit of a word with each other, and basically it brings the anxiety down and it helps people be more rational about the situation.
And this has been peer reviewed. This has been proven to be effective.
Yeah, highly evidence-based technique. It hasn't been around for a whole long, I think it was discovered in 1987. So there's still lots of research, but there's a hell of a lot of research that's been published on it. And also I've used it a lot and it's amazingly effective. When I first trained in it, I thought, surely this isn't going to work. And then you see how powerful it is. So that's a great technique for phobias.
Got another one in. Any cure for fears of dentist? Can't even sit on the chair and I cry my eyes out.
Yeah, it's another difficult one, because if we can get the person to go into the situation, then eventually their fear will desensitize because they'll learn that it's never as bad as what they're anticipating. There may be some pain that they might experience in that situation, but usually people will anticipate that it's going to be much worse than it actually is. So you can try and start gradually. So you can try and maybe see if the person can just, if you get the right environment, can the person sit in the dentist chair without any procedure taking place? Can they sit there for maybe 10 minutes just doing some deep breathing? Then maybe could they have an instrument that the dentist might use maybe quite close to their face without any treatment taking place? And then you just build it up. You have to look at it like a hierarchy. Where's the easiest place for you to start, and how can we build on that? So as they manage their anxiety for one of the scenarios, then we create another scenario and build it up that way.
And do you root much in what the cause is? Do you sit down and talk to people and say, let us do the Freudian thing of getting to where this originally grew from, or do you sort of put that to one side and just get on with the fixing?
I always like to know, and it depends on what therapy I'm doing. If I'm doing exposure therapy, I don't really need to know. It doesn't really matter, because some people won't be able to tell you. Some people just don't remember where the fear came from in the first place. If you're doing eye movement desensitization reprocessing, you often work on the early memory that caused the phobia in the first place. And there's different reasons people develop phobias. People often have a very negative experience themselves, or they witness someone else having a very negative experience, or they just hear information from another person from an early age that causes them to be afraid. But it doesn't really matter where the phobia came from. You don't need to figure that out to get treatment.
But I can become phobic through somebody else. If I see a horror reaction or a terrified reaction in somebody else, that can actually be the genesis of a phobia in me.
It's unlikely that it would happen to you at this age, but if you were a 3-year-old child and you see someone else being
I'm a very sensitive person.
Maybe, it's not completely impossible. But kids pick up phobias from other people quite often.
Another one says, Anton, I don't know why this preface is necessary, but nonetheless, Anton, I'm a big, hairy, 6.5 foot tall man, but butterflies terrify me. If one flies in, I have to leave the room. I hate them. Can you help?
This is quite common, even though they look quite pretty, and spider phobia is much more common. I tend to hear things like this. Exposure therapy is the right way to go. So literally, this guy needs to plan, where can he find butterflies? Is there certain environments that he can go into that he can actually put himself in that situation? Start by watching some videos, because often people will have a very phobic reaction even if they're just watching a video. Certainly when I treat spider phobia, I often start with videos and people can't even look at the screen. So you start small and then you build it up. For this, it's kind of hard to find situations where you're going to find butterflies, but he needs to do a bit of research and find out, well, where can he actually do some exposure work with this.
And how do you get people to be willing to take that first step? Because there's a colleague of ours in here who is petrified of dogs. And I sort of have this huge urge to go, you know what, I have a nice dog. How about we start 50 feet away and we'll walk him gradually closer and you'll be fine. But as soon as you begin that conversation with, you should do something about this, you can see the blood drain out of the person's face and it's just, nope, not doing it.
You'd make a great therapist. You already got the right idea. The person has to be willing. If someone comes to me and says, look, I've got this terrible phobia, I really want to treat it, we can do something about it. If someone says, no, I'm not interested, I'm fine to keep my phobia, I often meet people like that, just let them keep it, you know. Don't try and force them into treatment. People have to be ready.
We have a load of queries about phobias, and we also have suggestions about phobia treatment, including what I think is referred to as flooding. Will you stay with us through the break and we'll come to them afterwards?
Sure.
Becky, thank you very much. 53102 if you want to get in touch, or Anton at todayfm.com.
The Anton Savage Show on Today FM with Toyota Quality Service. For the care your Toyota deserves at a more affordable price than you'd think. Toyota, the best built cars in the world.
We can only assume the lads from the academic are listening, because we've had a query about phobia, which is, of course, fear of being stared at by a duck. We'll get to that one in a second. First, I was in school with a fellow with a phobia of peas. Yes, the vegetable. We bought a packet and put them in his bag at lunch. He took his books out and screamed. The teacher was struggling to discipline us with a straight face. This goes in the category of, like the ones that we were discussing earlier on, like cotton wool. How do you develop phobias of peas and cotton wool?
I love the weird phobias. I love hearing about them. You know, there is all sorts of theories, and the Freudian theory is that when people are very young, they're experiencing an emotion like fear, and they're not able to quite relate what that fear is about, so they just put that fear, they project it onto some random object. So that's the Freudian theory. It's like a misplacement of emotions. It's, you know, harder to know if that's really where it came from, and sometimes we never figure it out.
And it is possible to accrue a phobia just by unexplained coincidence, to never be able to say there was a trauma, there's no logical reason, you just have developed it.
Well, that's where the Freudian theory might actually carry some weight, that actually might be a misplacement of emotion. One
saying, I'm a 39-year-old woman who has a phobia of eating fish. I don't know why I can't eat it. I ate it as a child. My mum doesn't remember when I stopped eating it. I own my own restaurant and I have fish dishes on the menu, but I have never tasted them. I put the fork to my mouth, but still can't bring myself to actually taste it. Please help. Well, what are the steps then, Becky, on the route to actually getting a fork to a mouth in that instance?
Yeah, you think about what's the very most basic thing she could possibly do. You know, is it cutting up the tiniest little bit of fish and just holding it close to her lips and, you know, staying there for about 5 minutes, just doing some deep breathing, and then the anxiety always comes down. So anxiety reaches a peak and it will always come down after that. It doesn't just keep rising. And once people realize that, then they can take things a step further. So it's, you just do it step by step, and then hopefully eventually she can take a bite, realize her worst fear doesn't actually come true, and then you know, it should be something that maybe 2 hours of exposure therapy should be fine. I reckon that she's just been avoiding it for such a long time, and she hasn't actually started to do that exposure therapy, or she hasn't really persisted with putting herself in that uncomfortable situation.
We've had a couple of people suggesting the thing of more or less just bite the bullet. If you're afraid of fish, or if it is somebody that you love who's afraid of fish, almost quasi force feed them, or if somebody is afraid of flying, push them onto an aircraft. I assume that ain't a way to go.
Well, actually it is. It sounds horrible, but if, you know, the way I work as a therapist, if someone is up for it and they're prepared for it and it's not going to scare them away, then you do the flooding therapy, which is basically worst case scenario, do it right away. It works much faster than the graded hierarchy way of doing things. But most people would just be scared away by doing that. They'll just, you know, leave therapy and never come back again. So we want to get people cured here. And often we have to start small. But for some people, if they're ready and they're saying, yeah, let's just do the worst case scenario, then I'm like, brilliant, we're going to do this even faster. So actually, it does work.
And what happens? You put them in a room. I mean, let's say the butterfly guy. You lock him in a room with a butterfly, you leave it, and eventually he is there so long that he gets to a point of saying, oh, well, this is just life now.
Oh, it sounds so cruel. I would, with him, I'd start smaller, and we'd literally just start with videos if that's going to cause an anxious reaction. And, you know, you have to have a lot of empathy and compassion for people, and you have to see where their emotions are at and how they're managing their anxiety. You don't want to lead people to have panic attacks, but that can happen when people are confronting their fears. So sometimes you have to sort of take them out of the situation, help them manage the high levels of anxiety or even that panic attack type of anxiety, and then get them to the next stage. So locking him in a room with butterflies, I don't think I'd do that.
Well, here's one then. How about this one? I have a terrible phobia of balloons, to such a point that I avoid all family occasions, parties, etc. Can we lock them in a room with balloons?
Yeah, let's do that one. Again, it's whatever the person is ready for. I would say whatever we can possibly do exposure work wise, it should be collaborative. The person should be opting into it and saying, yeah, let's do it. If it's too much for them, then we need to step down a little bit and do something a bit easier.
Do you need to do anything associative after the back of it has been broken to cement the absence of the phobia? So if somebody, let's say the person didn't eat fish, if they then begin to be able to sample it, do you need to spend a couple of weeks saying, right, come on, we're going out to dinner, it'll be really fancy, and you're eating fish, so you get to associate it with being positive?
That's a great question. Not necessarily. It depends on how far the person goes with the exposure therapy. So, for example, last week I treated a girl with spider phobia in 1 hour, and I know that she won't need any more work because of what she managed to achieve. In that hour, she was holding a massive tarantula like as if she was an expert spider handler. And, I just know that that's cemented enough for her. If the person with the fish eating phobia only went half of the way, they would consistently, on a regular basis, need to do more work to get over the phobia even more.
What about hypnosis?
I don't use hypnosis. I think that I know that eye movement desensitization reprocessing has a stronger evidence base, so that's the one that I choose to use. But hypnosis, some people, it works for some people.
Because presumably it can help with things like suppressing that urge to panic.
Yeah, it can do. If people come to the clinic and they ask me to do hypnosis, I just do the treatment that I'm skilled in, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. People are usually happy with that because it looks like hypnosis, but it works in a different way. And actually what's nice is there is a clearer rationale as to how it works and why it works, and people quite like that, to be able to really explain what's happening in the treatment.
Is there that well organised or rather well evidenced rationale? I thought there was still a bit of a vagueness between cause and effect.
Yeah, it is. They don't know exactly how it works, but they believe it's linked to REM eye movement like we have in sleep. So when we sleep, we're said to be processing a lot of our emotions, and if we actually create those eye movements in people while they're awake, they can process their emotions. So, they've got some good ideas as to how it works, and because it works so well, we don't have all the information yet, but we have enough to know.
Here's an interesting one for you, because this is one where to some extent you think this must be being tackled on an ongoing basis, but it doesn't work. It says, hi Anton, I have a choking fear. When I get anxious, I've trouble swallowing my spit. I don't like eating in public or in front of people. I'm terrified of flying, not because of flying, but because of being able to swallow when I'm nervous and can't get medical attention. I get panic attacks because of it mid-flight. I was okay until I had an MRI 3 weeks ago. Any ideas? I do yoga weekly. That does help, but the more I try to relax, the more I feel a panic attack coming on. I'm in a constant state of nervous energy. So here's somebody who obviously can swallow, and they can swallow saliva, but just sometimes they get phobic.
Yeah, I've treated people just like this. You have to, again, take it in stages, and you have to prove to them that their belief about the situation is never going to come true, that their worst fear doesn't come true. So that's where working quite closely with a therapist can come in helpful, because you can get small pieces of food, get them to eat that in front of you. If they are starting to have a panic attack, you can then educate them about panic attacks and break the cycle of panic, because often if you're treating someone who has a real issue with panic attacks as well, it does make it more complicated. So, for some of these, it would be worth having a little bit of help. And for other, for other phobias, you can literally just work with people who are close to you, family members, friends can support you in the exposure therapy. I think for that person, when they're struggling with panic attacks as well, you need to convince them that actually they can manage those panic attacks and that they can have control over that.
I know this is not a question that one should ask a doctor, but what's the oddest phobia you've had?
There's lots of odd ones. Tomato ketchup, fear of holes, like holes in crumpets or just holes in the wall or any type of holes.
Like in Swiss cheese?
Yeah, that kind of thing. And yeah, I met a girl the other day. She wasn't a client or anything, but people just like to tell me their phobias. And then I meet a lot of people with all the common ones like heights and spider phobia.
Have you ever met anybody afraid of being stared at by a duck?
No, have you?
Well, we keep getting texted, and we had a guy in a band. There's a very good band called The Academic who played with us live when we were on an OB, and one of them claimed to be petrified by being stared at a duck. We didn't have any ducks to test it with, but the next time we see him, we'll stick him in a room with a load of ducks and see how it works out.
Well, we did do bird phobia on the show, and they were probably scared of being stared at by ducks, but also scared of all birds.
Well, that's just one of them. There's fear of birds, there's fear of water, there's fear of heights. There's a whole lot of phobias that are addressed. And Becky, if you're willing, because we've tons more that we could ever get to, we might drag you back on at a later stage and get you to address some of the others.
I'd love to come back again. It's been great fun.
Becky, thank you so much.
The Anton Savage Show on Today FM with Toyota Quality Service. For the care your Toyota deserves at a more affordable price than you'd think. Toyota, the best built cars in the world. Cars in the world. Cars in the world.